Well, let's go ahead and get started with discussion. Go ahead and introduce myself. My name is Dr. Ricardo Cunningham. I'm chair of the business department at the University of Dubuque. And I'll introduce our panelists. Dr. Henry Grubb, who is professor in psychology department. Dr. John Bars, who is actually chair of the English department. Mr. Andre Laceres, who works for the city of Dubuque. Mr. Willie Slayton, who's a diversity consultant in Dubuque. Ms. Amy Ressler, who is introduced theater, director of theater and professor at the University of Dubuque. Our young actors, give them another round of applause, please. Excellent job, gentlemen. I'm not totally sure about the hard-boiled eggs. I don't know how they affect you, but I hope you don't have roommates tonight, so. All right, so what we're attempting to do is kind of discuss the play, and then you're trying to get the feeling that Brian is trying to instill in us. So we're going to have hopefully a very robust discussion, and then open up to some questions from the audience. So the first question is, and we can start with you, Dr. Grubb. Why do you think that Paul Robeson and Saul Butler hit it off so quickly and opened up so deeply?
Probably because, like they both said from the play, they were the only African-American, well, Paul was the only African-American at his college, and Saul had his brother as support. So back in those days, to see another African-American in the same boat you were, naturally you'd be drawn to each other.
All right, John?
I obviously agree with what Henry said there, but I think one of the interesting things is to see, the whole exhibit picks out on all of the commonalities, even, both having brothers named Ben and all of this. But I think what came through for me in the play is the contrast in their experience, even though it's so similar. Mm-hmm. And as a Dubuquer for the last 10 years, it was sort of nice to see Dubuque be the place where there was more acceptance. Paul's in an urban setting out east and faces the kind of opposition that Saul didn't here, apparently, or at least not quite so obviously. So that was something that struck me.
I agree with both of them. I think it's similar to when I first moved to Dubuque in '06. It was that sense for searching for someone who looks like you to connect with, that sense of comfort that you find in someone who's sharing your experience, whether it's spoken or not. When you're in a place where there are very few people who you feel share your experiences, there's this aura that kind of comes off where you can meet that kindred spirit who can relate to some of the things that you are experiencing, and also you have an opportunity to ask some questions that you perhaps can't ask anyone else. And that, I believe, led to the opportunity for a deep conversation, because those were probably questions that they were struggling with inside themselves that they weren't able to share with anyone in the community where they were living. So it was a really, I think, a great opportunity for both of them.
Thank you.
I'm going to venture off and agree with Andre over here. When I came here in '06, it was the exact same thing. You really didn't find, probably not in that same scenario as Paul and Saul, but you really didn't find too many students of color on the campus. So it was just by building community, reaching out. You wanted to venture out and find out for yourself, how did other people like you feel or have similar experiences in the city or in the town. You just wanted to make some kind of connection and build an overall community. And you heard it from the play itself. Paul said himself that he was seeking out other race runners or race men. So, I just want to say I thought they hit it off well just because it was all Paul's motive to actually build some type of community and, communicate about the differences that we experience, or if any similarities.
Would you like?
Well, one of the things that this brought to mind for me was the idea that, athletics, just like the arts, builds a community within its team. And so when I first read the play and found out that the things that Brian had written that Paul Robeson experienced were true, that really gave me pause to think about, to really question that assumption that a team is necessarily a community. And hopefully they become that. And then it reminded me of something that a student had said to me not too long ago about, and I hope that this doesn't continue to be the case, that for some students, the University of Dubuque is kind of an island of safety and a community that they don't necessarily feel the same kind of support and deep connection to people outside of the campus, but they really feel like they need to stay here so that the city of Dubuque doesn't necessarily reflect the support for the community that they feel here on this campus.
My little input here would be the only relation I have to Paul Robeson's situation in 1916 would be being an African-American pilot here. There's not a lot of us, so when we see others, we're able to connect in a much easier manner. And like Amy said, sometimes the University of Dubuque is a safe haven, and some parts of the community are more welcoming than others, but hopefully that'll change over time.
Being a college student, I think we run into the moment a lot where we walk in the lunchroom and we're like looking for someone to sit with. And I think a common thing is to find somebody of kind of your demeanor, someone you know you can connect with. And I'm sure for Sol and Paul, you know, they probably felt a little uncomfortable when you've got others around you referring to you as boy. In this case, a smaller person than you referring to as boy. And it was probably real relieving to find somebody else that, you know, they could connect with right off the bat, that they could talk to as equals. I'd imagine if I was in a room surrounded by people that were talking down to me, I probably wouldn't feel too comfortable. So I'd imagine it was probably instant relief to have someone to connect with, to be able to share experiences with. So.
Yeah, I agree with Tyler, but I was just thinking, they're at the Penn Relays, and when Paul was just looking for somebody just sit with, saw someone else who was just black, and I just felt like just because there were two, that common race thing just brought them together. So I think it was just as simple as that. They just saw that we're both black, we're both at the Penn Relays, you know, let's just sit down and chat, because probably have a lot in common. And once they started talking, they figured out, yeah, they do have a lot in common, so that's how I feel.
All right. Now for the second question, Henry, I'm going to start with you for a specific purpose. We know, based upon what we've discussed in other panels, that you grew up during the 60s, during which was a very violent and very prevalent time for race relations. So question number 2, how would you have handled the experience of segregation that the two men described?
Taking me back to 1916, right? Instead of 1960.
Well, whichever frame that you want to use to answer the question.
That would have been a hard time for me. The 60s was a hard time for me. And those two men were much more urbane, educated, and relaxed about race than I certainly were at that age. And they were able to take a lot more than I probably would have been able to take. So I think God put me at the right time. In the 1960s and 70s, where I could stand up and not have to take that kind of abuse that I'm sure my father and my grandfather had to take. I'm thankful that they were able to get through the storm. But I would not have fared well.
For me, a couple of the really great moments in this script are those moments of ethical dilemma that both of them face. How am I going to react to this injustice? The movie theater thing, do I protect my pride and sacrifice an opportunity to see something that would be enjoyable, to be, you know, and Robeson poses that question, well, how are you going to be part of the progress if you pull away from it? I think there's some real dilemmas that way, and the question that Robeson raises of what, have you been benched? by your opposing team. That was a reality. Saul talks about it in his book. Growing up in Kansas, track meets that were going to be, pit him against the great runners in Kansas, and all of a sudden the track meet doesn't happen. And that goes on, in the history of college athletics. One of the interesting things that I've discovered in reading about this issue is that 1915, 1916, when Saul Butler gets to Dubuque College, is a pretty good moment, and it gets worse. The NFL integrated in the 20s and then segregated in 1934. Big Ten teams had black athletes as early as the 1890s, but then they would play Southern schools and be asked to bench those players. There's some really interesting history out there about how teams responded, how students responded, how schools responded. There are instances, a small college in DePauw, Indiana, where the student body rose in protest after one of their star athletes was benched because they wouldn't cross the color line to play this other team. So I think that question of how does an athlete respond, how do his white teammates, that's the side of this I would be on if I'd been in that situation. What do I do if that's my teammate? Do I play? I think those are some really intriguing dilemmas here.
Just to build on it, I, like Henry, think God put me at the right time because I don't think I would have been able to have the courage to make the decisions that Paul and Saul were able to make in what I would say is holding their tongue. But, that moment of rage that Paul experienced on the football field, I think was probably more common than not. But the social climate that caused it to temper because of the fact of a sense of responsibility for the next person coming behind you. If you lash out, if you don't toe the line, if you overstep your bounds, how it makes that next person's journey that more difficult. The sense of responsibility for the next person in line, so to speak, is tremendous for this generation. And I don't think that's something that I know my generation definitely doesn't have that burden, not to date Brother Henry, but, that his generation had. I thank God for Henry's generation, for the struggle and the fight that they put forward for my generation where, it's a little bit easier, but it's still, but I don't have the weight as much. There aren't a lot of firsts out there that I look for where we still have to have that first person to kind of blaze that trail for us. It's unfortunate, but at the same time, it's something that I think we don't really have an appreciation for on why they were able to survive what they were going through.
Like these guys, I'm glad I just wasn't around during that time, because I'm a youngin'. I'm a '80s baby, so I'm a loose cannon. I'm obnoxious. I can't hold my tongue. I let my thoughts do my work, but it's hard to live that way now while we're still facing certain barriers, because I have to remember I have my credentials on the line, my career, and the livelihood of those who are going to follow behind me. But the only thing I really took away from the whole situation was how Saul really handled it, and I wasn't disappointed, but I wasn't actually completely proud, because as he leaves a movie theater, he leaves his brother behind. And right now, I feel that my generation, we're in the steps, we're in the whole cohesion of, am I my brother's keeper? And some of us about, we're not or we are. I don't think we are per se not our brother's keeper, but we are responsible for the collective message that we spread to our brothers. So with Saul leaving the theater, leaving his brother there, whether it be in harm's way or not, you're not really serving your purpose, because while you're standing up for yourself, leaving the situation or leaving the business itself, you're leaving your brother behind, and the collective message is different. You're saying you're standing up for yourself and you're making a stand, but what is your brother really standing for? And as we all know, doing these whole civil rights acts and these moments of rebellion doing race issues, you always have powers in numbers. So I really wasn't too clear on Saul's thinking when he actually left his brother behind in the movie theater.
Thank you.
Well, the question, what would I have done? How have you handled experiences? Well, I'm basically a chicken, or at least when I was, 18 or 20, I'm still real shy, and I don't like to be the first one to go at anything. So I first and foremost really, really, really admire their courage, and it amazes me when I hear about, stories of people who went first, who, continued to kept their kids in school even though there were police outside, and the story of Ruby, you know what I'm talking about. Anyway, that's the first thing I thought. But then I realized, in the story that Paul tells about what his father says to him, that the white man will take whatever you leave them, whatever you give them, thank you, will take it. And it's true, some human beings are really bad to each other. And we teach people how to treat us by allowing them to treat us the way that they do. And here I am, I think I'm the only woman up here. There's all different kinds of reasons that people come up with for trying to put others down and put themselves up. I think there's a great story of showing, being the better person in all of those situations, and I would hope that we would have the courage to always recognize the personhood in others. What would I do in that situation? I hope nowadays I would have the courage to stand up for the personhood of myself and for other women, for other men, and for other people. But I don't know in that time and period if I would have. Definitely not when I was 18. They're amazing. These are two amazing guys.
At the time period, I would be more of the Saul Butler type to stay to the nonviolent acts, such as Dr. King himself, and hopefully through that, accomplishments can be done. Of course, it takes more time, but it also keeps a certain image up for whatever race you are trying to get civil rights for, because violence strictly isn't the answer. So,
I'd imagine being around back then, I'd be pretty angry. To work as hard as Paul and Saul did, to have the skills they did, to be as smart as they were, to be as fast as they were, and then to be told that you can't participate like everybody else, to be looked down upon, I would be pretty angry. And, that's the United States, we're pitched the American dream. If you work as hard, if you follow the means, you'll reach the goals. And, we live by that dream. It might not be 100% true, but that's the ideal we strive behind. So then to be told that, yeah, you worked hard enough, yeah, you're good enough, but sorry, you can't participate, that would hurt. And it gives so much respect for Saul, saying we're race men. Even though you know that you deserve this, even though you know it's wrong, to walk away because you know what that means for your people and for how well it'll represent you, that's amazing. That's pretty admirable.
So I guess how I would handle this is with respect. Like one thing I want to point out in the play when Tyler's character walked up and said, "Oh, I hate to break your dawdling, boys, you all have to move." When he said that, if you notice that Paul stood up. Now, I believe he stood up not because he wanted to, beat him up. I think he stood up because he wanted to almost like demand respect. Notice how Paul, he went through all that trials, and he stood up to the white man, not to try to intimidate him, just to say, hey, give me respect. And when it came to Saul's character, he was going to stand up to actually just show the white man respect. And I think that's how I would handle it, just showing just everybody just respect. Even if they treat me with disrespect, you can still respect them, and hopefully you change their mind, just one person at a time. And that's how I would have, I guess, handled it.
Now, for the third question, I'm just going to direct this directly at our two actors, our main leads in the play. So, what part of their story connects most directly with your life in the world today? so you can relate directly to your characters.
All right, I need to think. Now I'm going through the whole play.
Coming from Central Massachusetts, kind of the diversity set up as Dubuque, Iowa is, and senior year I played on an all-white football team, only black guy. And there's certain instances where I had Paul Robeson moments, so that's the best thing I can relate to. And you know, a couple jokes here and there, but after something goes too far, I chose to take it into my own hands and dealt with it that way. Of course, now being in college, I deal with things in a much different, lighter manner, but yeah, that's what relates to my life the best.
Thank you.
I think one of the parts of the story is where when Paul said, "Oh, do Negroes do even live in Iowa?" and Saul said, "Oh, I do." That was one. That just kind of reminded me when I actually moved here to Iowa to go to University of Dubuque. I came from Colorado before, and the biggest thing people were wondering when I moved to Dubuque was like, "Hey, do black people even live in Iowa?" And yeah, I do. And the one thing is I wish they could come to the University of Dubuque so they can actually see that it's not just black people. University of Dubuque actually holds really big diversity, and you can see like a person from every race. Like in fact, my roommate, he's Egyptian, you know? And that's one part I think that really relates to me is just the, I guess the diversity of Dubuque.
We all have that same story, so don't. All right, does anybody from the audience would like to ask a question of anybody on the panel? If so, please come up to the microphone.
Thank you and good night.
All right.
Where's the playwright? Why isn't he up on here?
Dr. Halstus, could you stand, please?
I'll use the mic here since we're being recorded here. I'd asked not to be a part of the panel simply because I wanted the emphasis to be on the issues that the play and the exhibition raised, and I thought rather than on my intentions. And if you got me going, we'd be here a lot longer than we're going to be here tonight. And so I thought it was better. I was more interested in what all they had to say and to keep it focused on the issues instead. So I'd be happy to speak with any of you about what I was thinking and about the history after the show. But again, don't get me started. So.
Thank you for your consideration.
I'm Frank Potter. Just a comment. I thought that as somebody who studied Paul Robeson all my life, I thought this was like having Paul Robeson here and Saul Butler. It's really, really great. The main thing I would say is that it's for people to realize that maybe you're just here they're learning about Saul Butler and Paul Robeson. But the thing with Paul Robeson was the Dr. King before Dr. King. Internationally, he was the most popular person in the world at the time. He was that popular. Everybody knew him around the world. And he was the leader. So that's the important thing. Saul Butler was a great black person for University of Dubuque and a great athlete, but Paul Robeson was the man before Dr. King.
Thank you, sir. Anybody else?
I just want to comment on when you were talking about being downtown. I was very immersed in the presence experience of the play. So, and I was interested, what occurred to me when you talked about not going into the movie, but coming home, I thought about your walk home. Between, because I'm sure that was what is Five Flags now, the Majestic Theater. And that's way downtown, and this is way up on the hill. So I was thinking about that experience of you getting home, because I mean, we all know that there comments would be made from cars or whatever, streetcars or whatever at that point. So very immersed in that experience too. And the other thing was that my feeling about them meeting in the locker room or wherever, It felt very much that it could have been very much that you two ended up alone and deserted in a locker room or in a hallway or somewhere at those relays where you were thrown together anyway because everybody else might have been off in their teams doing something else. So that felt very real to me and honest.
Okay.
So,
All right,
just-
thank you. We still have time for more questions. Would anybody else like to share their comments?
Okay. Yes, I'm Jalal Paul, for you on the panel who don't know me. Mario, he's one of my fellow pilots at the university, as well as my twin sitting over there. He didn't want to come up. But one thing that I just wanted to touch base on is that I know Mario personally, and him being a fellow pilot, we would often study for a few pilot exams that we have throughout this course. And there's actually, in fact, I'd say 10 to 15 other African-American pilots who study with us. So we all gravitate to our apartment, and we usually just, chop it up, as we would say, and we get ready for the exams as such. And we just thought it's amazing because most of us aren't from this area. We're from the East Coast as well. We're from the New Jersey, New York area. Mario's from Massachusetts, as well as 2 other African-Americans. So we just think it was funny, just like Saul and Paul, how they met at Penn Relays, and we all came from all corners of America and came to the Midwest to fly planes thousands of feet over the ground. So that's just one thing that really hit home. So it's,
All right, thank you. Anybody else? There was a couple things that maybe, I don't know, Brian, you may want to comment on this one. There was a couple of things to play. One, we all wear the mask. Yeah, and then the other one, burden of a race man. And anybody can want to share on that one. What was that impact? Those are two very impactful statements that I get from.
I think for me in particular, being a first-generation college student and growing up in a community where it was really emphasized the pride of being an African American. I grew up, and I was fortunate enough to be surrounded by educators who went out of their way to show me positive representations of who I was. Unfortunately, they were all dead, There weren't a lot of positive African American role models for where I was at my time when I was growing up. Mm-hmm. And so growing up, I used to say, well, I say now as I'm older, is I aspired to do the white thing, right? Mm-hmm. I wanted to get married, not because that was the right thing to do, it's because that's what white people did. I wanted to go to college, not because I felt that was be successful, but that's because what white people did. So I put on this mask of trying to navigate a world, and I felt like I had to give up some of my blackness in order to be successful. And I didn't know it at the time, but I was wearing a mask because I felt that was the mask that I needed to be successful, because if I was angry and showed my anger, then I scared off the people who probably could have helped me, or at least that was the perception that I had. And I think most of us who experience being the first or only or one of the few, we all do wear that mask, and it's unfortunate. And I see the goal is trying to figure out how can we create an environment where that mask is not necessary, where my sons and daughters, who are making noise over there, I love them very much, where they don't have to experience or have to wear masks the way that I did. Because the question I was really trying to answer was, what does it mean to be a successful black man in America? And I think that's the curiosity. One of the things down here that the young white, what's your name, my brother? Tyler.
Hey.
One of the things he said that really struck a chord for me was like, you work hard, you're smart, you're the best at what you do, but yet, you're not able to attain the American dream, right? That whole adage, as an African-American male, I have to work 200% to get 100% of the credit, right? And to me, that's the contradiction of the American dream. You know, there's different American dreams. There's glass ceilings, both for as an African American male that I face, that women face, that, you know, any other group faces, and that's the contradiction that I think we are struggling with as Americans in this new age society of this quote unquote hypocrisy that is believed to be a post-racial society. And I think those that we wear the mask line really strikes a chord of the struggle that we face of trying to find our place in the society that has forced a glass ceiling on those who are not in power.
That mask, yeah, let me tell you about that mask. Because we all had to wear it, right? You all have to, but that mask will smother you. At some point, you got to take that mask off. That mask can get you in a door, but our young people need to see real black men who take that mask off too. That there's certain limits you can go with me, and I'm not going to act white as you perceive acting white. And I think we lost that. And that's what I noticed from this play. No one questions the system. We're always looking at the victim. And that's the same thing that's happening today. Every prophet has been killed or banned. King took the mask off, and King was not liked back when King was marching. The society hated King. We make monuments to him now like it was a breeze. Robeson, that's true. Robeson was banned, had his passport taken. They did not like Robeson when he took the mask off and stood up as a man. And I see that same thing now. If I act a certain way, I'm accepted in. But if I make threats to change the system, even today, my job could be taken, my livelihood could be taken, I could be locked up. None of that has changed. That's what I still see. And that is a hard line. How do you thread that needle to teach our young people to get an education, to do what's right, but then suffocate your soul by acting like something you're not?
I just realized I need to say the most important thing I've said all night, and that is just to set the record straight. One of the smartest things I did is when I finished up the first rough draft, I gave it to my wonderful, beautiful wife to take a look at it and read through it. And we were going through that part where Saul is saying, you know, you can help me out here. It's I forget what. You know, it's clean living, and it's our Heavenly Father. And initially, it did not say anything about the mask. And when she read that, she's like, Brian, you got to put in Paul Laurence Dunbar. He wears we wear the mask. And she's actually a student of Dunbar High School in Chicago, and was saying the plan. I was like, yeah, that does fit there. That works well. And also simply to say that I forgot the most important recognition and thank you, and that's to my wonderful wife who's given me the time to do things like this. So.
Just briefly, I'd like to address this to Andre. I'm the wife of one of the professors here, and I teach middle school. And I'm sorry, I think I have you're Andre.
I'm Willie.
Willie, I'm sorry. My husband knows I'm really bad with names.
Get some glasses.
I'm curious, I sat with Dr. Bong Long Do, and she said you were on the board with her of the Multicultural Center.
Yes, ma'am.
Can you speak to how race relations are functioning today in Dubuque? I feel that maybe some of us who live in this area and teach out at, you know, Roosevelt Middle School might be a little out of touch. It's definitely a different demographic out that way. Can you kind of enlighten us on what you experience?
Personally and through research and work, the city is definitely segregated. It's broken down into subgroups and subcultures, more accepting. Some communities are more accepting to certain groups and certain demographics than others. But the most strange thing to me is that as Dubuque, Iowan, as a Dubuquean, if you can use that term, we hold this pedestal of nominations and actual accolades that have been passed on through magazines and so forth, that we are an all-American city, we are one of the top 10 places to raise your family. But you can compare that to that American dream scenario. Is that same casualty, that same goal held the same towards every citizen in this town? And it's not. I came here in 06 from Miami, Florida, so I'm a Southern boy. And I experienced definite connections with the Sol and Paul story just because you have demographics of white Dubuqueans that will accept you no matter who you are, no matter where you're from, but then it's also broken down to those that don't. And then you have those that they won't accept you no matter what, but once you cross that barrier and you gain some type of education within this town, which they're known for through all their colleges and universities, then you gain more acceptance. And then it just totally blows my mind because if you look through the line of poverty, everyone that's been broke, poor, or impoverished in this town has been white. So I really don't understand how we can have such a divide on the lines of race when you have whites hurting just as much as blacks, but no one really wants to stand up and recognize that. Now, the best thing that I noticed through race relations in this town is the youth. The youth, they really don't have the same eye or the mind that those in this room have. When I say that, everyone in this room is pretty much 18 and over, except for the Laseers over there. Some of them are kind of young. But those guys over there are not experiencing the same things we're experiencing. My perfect example was when I came here, race relations on my end was pushed due to college education. They're taking their leaps of faith on their own. They're out there playing sports, engaging, talking to each other, inviting each other over to, break bread and share meals and stories. And that's what I'm looking forward to. Now, I might call a few people out in the room, but I think what we've experienced the most backlash within racial relations is when it becomes those people that are much older, and I say that 60 or older category. You hear a lot of excuses from personal experience. I used to get a lot of, you can't date my daughter because you're black, you can't succeed because you're doing this, or because it mostly came down to race. And the most excuse those people use, those are my ways, I was born into those ways, the ways I was brought up, those are my traditions. But this is America. We make money off anything new that comes over here and that puts green in our pockets and transform it into a tradition. We don't celebrate Cinco de Mayo and, the Chinese New Year without thinking about dollar signs. So I wouldn't say you should sit back and let, the plight of America be contradicted by dollar signs and race. We should actually break down some barriers and want to experience what it is to be a real American per se.
Can I say briefly, I'm really heartened at how the kids have integrated themselves, even out on the western edge.
Mm-hmm. And I've subbed all around this area a few years ago, and I think times are changing, from when they're this big now. And I don't see major problems in the schools at this point, which I'm so happy about.
You're right, but like I said, the kids are doing their part, but everyone else not. Now, perfect setting, you're an educator, you work in the school system. If you do some diagrams and some research on the schools of Dubuque, they're heavily segregated. A lot of the black students go down towards Lincoln, Bryant, I'm going to say Prescott, while you leave school, Fulton, while you leave schools like Carver, Roosevelt, and those predominantly white. I don't see how that's fair, and why anyone who has a kid or anyone as an educator in the system should feel fine with that. That's just not fair. While we're working to a colorblind or a post-racial society, we're still sitting back and we're living back in the days like when they first integrated the first school in New Jersey or whatnot, say. How can we sit here and say we are a postmodern society when I can go right now and walk to Roosevelt, which I'm a middle school wrestling coach at, and I could count how many black kids are in the school itself? That was long-winded, but thank you.
So I'm not black, obviously, but graduating from a high school that was the majority white, I might as well have been. And then the part in the play that really stood out to me was when Paul addressed Sol, and he kind of asked him about his teammates, kind of picking on him for being colored. I actually went through that somewhat. The team that I ran with was majority white, and they believed that I didn't deserve a spot on their team, not because I wasn't good enough, but because I wasn't like them, and I didn't try to be like them. I knew I was different, and I never tried to say anything other than that. And then also when Saul did say that at Dubuque that never happened to him, I can also agree with that when I came here to Dubuque, it was open arms. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Lorna Goodwin Riley. I'm Ramon's mother. And Ramon had a hard time answering the question when he asked him, how can he relate to the story? He paused. And the reason why he paused is Ramon has been privileged to go to schools that was always integrated because I'm a service member. I've served my country for 23 years, and he's been able to go around the world with me into communities that was integrated. So he never really had to live that life where he was, pushed aside or not appreciated. So he couldn't relate at the moment. He had to pause because he couldn't really feel it in his heart, but that's why we thank God that we have been in communities and that was integrated, and he was able to go to schools and always be safe and always felt wanted in the communities that we've been in.
Thanks, Mom.
I'm Trelanie Lunsford. I'm a freshman here, and I want to piggyback off of what she said and also what Fabi said. I'm also a military kid. I've lived in Korea, Germany, and places like that, so I've never experienced anything like that. But I thought it was really interesting to know that he was one of the first black people on the track team, and me being African American on the track team with multiple other African Americans and never experienced that. I just thought that really just showed me how we've grown as a school and as a team, and where we have come and where we're going. So this play really opened up my eyes a lot, because and even when when you guys asked him how did he relate to that, I myself couldn't relate to that. I've never been put in that situation, so that really opened my eyes. So that's it.
Thank you. Due to time, I think we have time for maybe one more question, then we can go ahead and wrap up. One more question. Thank you.
Whenever I think of black athletes, like great black athletes, I think of Jackie Robinson or Jesse Owens. I was wondering why these two athletes aren't brought up in that same sort of manner, because they obviously did great things for race relations, maybe even on par with Jesse Owens and Jackie Robinson. So.
Because they came first and they were local.
Actually, for Saul Butler, there's even a more concrete reason. It's because he pulled a muscle at the 1920 Olympics. If he'd won those Olympics, as he should have in the long jump, he would have been Jesse Owens before Jesse Owens. The projection was that he would have set a record that probably would have lasted until Owens. He set an American record. So, I mean, there's a real shame in that.
And I also think one of the things which happens in a lot of history is Jesse Owens came at a time when it was convenient for America to prop him on a pedestal because he went against the giant that was Nazi Germany. Here was an American. He wasn't a black American. Here was an American that stood up and defeated Germany in Germany. It was very convenient then when he was in Europe. But when he came home, he was reminded very quickly he was still black. But that did not get in the way of them propping him up, so to speak, in a newsreel of the greatness of Americans standing up to the Third Reich and the hypocrisy of Nazi Germany. Even though there was difference between how they were treated, but not by much. And I think that's also something that I think we can't dismiss in how Jesse Owens was in the right place at the right time to be used as propaganda for a certain agenda. And it's unfortunate because if you look at his story afterwards, after those Olympics, it's a very tragic story. I mean, he died basically a broke man. Financially, spiritually, physically, mentally. He was racing horses. Here's this great American hero reduced to racing animals to pay bills. And so we remember the magnificence of that feat that he had in Germany, but we don't remember where he ended up. And if he was truly an American hero at that time, to get back at what Henry said, you know, it's very sad. And it really makes me upset of the situation that it happened, because it's just a matter of convenience that he was the hero at that moment while it was good. And that's true throughout history for a lot of people, especially African Americans who contribute, do phenomenal feats, and then just think of Jack Johnson, you know, first African American heavyweight champion of the world. They created a law just because they were so angry because he was a black champion. They made a law, the Mann Act, just so that he could get arrested. And to this day, he hasn't been pardoned because of this hypocrisy of this law, you know. And you know, it's just, history's littered with examples of like that.
What kind of saddens me is there's still, hypocrisy still. Henry and I have talked about the fact that, there are people who still are uncomfortable with the fact that we have a black president, and there's people who think that should not have happened. And they thought when it happened once, it could not happen twice. And people like John Lewis, who marched in Selma, risked their lives for the Voting Rights Act, are now being shown profound disrespect because there are powerful white people who are trying to suppress that Voting Rights Act. So we're both 60s guys, and I think when Henry and I were young, we thought things would be better. But I don't think, when we were older, but I kind of see my life, I think maybe I'm in the bottom of the 7th in my baseball age. And I thought we would be farther on the road to equality than we are now.
Dick, top of the 7th. Brian, would you like to close us out?
Make it really brief. Thank you so much. Thanks again for coming and your wonderful comments and the wonderful comments from all of you. So thank you very much.